Hey there, hope all is well. Back at you today with some more RT News updates. And as you can tell from today's title, Russia to reduce reliance upon the dollar and payment systems. I'm going to be covering a couple different articles stemming from the recent sanctions passed on Russia and some of the actions they're taking to kind of counteract some of the sanctions being passed on them and how it impact the dollar as nations begin to really rethink the dollar and move away from it, predominantly doing with this payment system called SWIFT, which will be replaced for the most part in Russia with their own alternative system that allows them to bypass all these sanctions, things like that. So before I dive into those articles, I want to encourage you to click the subscribe button for more RT News updates and interviews, as well as visit the Rethinking the Dollar University page, where you get a chance to find out more about what it means to rethink the dollar and why you yourself should begin taking action now as all these countries begin to diversify themselves away from the Federal Reserve note, which has turned out to be a major problem for nations around the world who happens to invest and hold our debt. So let's dive into today's news. So today, as I mentioned, I have 6 articles dealing with sanctions as well as response by Russia on how they're going to begin basically diversifying themselves away from the Federal Reserve note and beginning to really think beyond the dollar as a Federal Reserve currency, just because it's too much of a liability on their part to be dependent upon the SWIFT system, which is the way in which banks do their transactions and whatnot. So what I have here is 6 articles dealing with what's going on and how they're going to begin doing that, of which 2 are more newer articles and the rest of them are a little bit older but still very relevant. And it shows how they've already been, step by step preparing for this moment when they really begin to ramp up the need for alternatives. And so the very first one here is from Reuters, and it's in regards to the sanctions. And it says, Trump signs Russian sanction bill. Moscow calls it a trade war. The very next one here is from RT, and it says, Russia to reduce reliance on U.S. dollar and payment systems in response to sanctions. And the very next one here is from Sputnik, and it says, Russia, the mere payment card to take on Visa and MasterCard's monopoly. So that gets into a little bit more as to what an alternative is for them as far as their banking system there with debit cards and credit cards. And the very next one here is from Press TV, and it says, Russia devises own SWIFT system. And this was from earlier in the year in March. And so the very next one here is from New China, and it says Russia finishes working on alternative interbank payment systems. So that's about a 3-4 month time span there of which they were working on it since I think it was 2014 or so. And it says they just finished it right around this time now as they begin to need it because of these sanctions and whatnot. And then the very next one here, the very last one here, is from the Activist Post, and it says Russia and China preparing alternative banking architecture. So basically, China and Russia over the last couple of years have been doing a lot of trade deals amongst themselves. And the biggest question has been, what currency will they be using? And for those that are aware and pay attention to events like these, that the Federal Reserve note, aka the dollar, will not be used in trade. And so that's why they're using the ruble as well as renminbi to do deals amongst themselves, as well as precious metals. And so let's get into the very first one. And as always, I'm not going to go through it all. I just want to give you an idea what's on the surface, but give you something to think about. And if you're interested, you can feel free to click the link below to get directed directly to these links to read it for yourself. So briefly, here we go. It has U.S. President Donald Trump grudgingly signed into law new sanctions against Russia on Wednesday, a move Moscow said amounted to a full-scale trade war and end to hope better ties with the Trump administration. It says Congress overwhelmingly approved the legislation last week, passing a measure that conflicts with the Republican president's desire to improve relations with Moscow. It says Trump signed the bill behind closed doors without the fanfare that has been customarily accompanied his signing of executive orders. It says he has criticized the measure as infringing on his powers to shape foreign policy and said he could make far better deals with governments than Congress can. And so Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev called the sanctions tantamount to a full-scale trade war, adding in a Facebook post not too long ago. So just give you an idea of what's going on. The whole idea of the sanctions being in place, Trump is not really for it, but it's something he kind of has to play along with in order to kind of, appease the Congress and all the things he want to get done eventually as the year unfolds. So I guess he decided to sign his name on the dotted line. And so because of that, let's move into some of the things that Russia will respond with in the very next article. It says Russia to reduce reliance on U.S. dollar and payment systems in response to sanctions. So here we go. So now that President Trump has signed his name on the dotted line, there are sanctions in place which will interfere with Russian citizens as well as their business, in and out of the country. And so let's get an idea of what they're going to do about that and how they have already been working on plans for things such as this. So it says here, the Russian government will intensify efforts to put the country's dependence on U.S. payment systems and the dollar as a settling currency, said Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Rybakov, this gentleman over my shoulder here, on Monday. So that's as of today. It says, we will, of course, speed up the work on import substitution, reduce dependence on U.S. payment systems, on the dollar as a settling currency, and so on. It is becoming vitally important. He's quoted as saying, says the U.S. is using its dominating role in the monetary and financial system to impose pressure on foreign businesses, including Russian companies. It says after Washington imposed sanctions on Moscow in 2014, it says the MasterCard interpayment system stopped serving clients of 7 Russian banks without warning. So basically, as it says here, MasterCard began, basically just, all of a sudden out of nowhere they stopped settling payments transactions dealing with those Russian companies, which led to the very next article, which I have here. And this is the idea of Russia beginning to go beyond the monopoly, as it says here, of Visa and MasterCard. So because of the sanctions back in 2014, they began working on their own card here. And so give you an idea of what's going on here. It says Sberbank, Russia's largest bank, is considering selling its shares in the Visa and MasterCard payment system in 2017. So this was written as of the end of last year. It says a senior company official has confirmed. It says business experts say the move has to do with the completion of their bank's integration with a new Russian national payment system using the Mir payment card. And so give you an idea what else is going on here. It says earlier this week, Sberbank deputy chairman said that the company is actively considering selling its shares in Visa and MasterCard next year. Says we plan to sell these shares. There is a high probability that these transactions will be completed in 2017. It says Moravov did not go into detail about the shares of the International Payment Systems Bank in its possession, but Russian businesses media has explained that after companies' entry into the Russian market in 2006-2008, banks using the payment system were to buy shares in the U.S. company. And so if you're interested, you can read more about that. But basically, it puts into circulation this card, which is right here, which is already in circulation in millions of Russians' hands. And they're beginning, I guess year by year and month by month, to basically shift everyone who is dependent upon Visa and MasterCard to their own local card here, which is a way of counteracting all of a sudden being cut off from transactions or being cut off from use by Visa and MasterCard. So that's just one way they're diversifying out of the use of a Western monetary financial instrument. Then the very next one here is Russia devises its own SWIFT system. So the SWIFT system has been the way that, since 1973 that all banks have been interconnected in regards to transporting financial messages and things like that across borders. And they've had to go through SWIFT, which is based here in the United States of America. And because tensions are so high amongst countries, Russia and China predominantly have begun working on their own alternative to this payment system, which allows them to transfer and to do business amongst their own currencies outside of the dollar. And so we'll give you an idea what's going on here. It says Russia says it has devised an alternative to a global electronic money transfer mechanism with the United States has shown it would readily use to disrupt overseas financial transactions of countries which it sanctions for political disputes. It says Ilivra, I don't want to begin pronouncing that, the governor of the Central Bank of Russia, was quoted by media as saying that Moscow was ready to use a substitute should the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication, or SWIFT, stop processing cross-border money transfers for the country's banks. Then it's quoted as saying here, says there were threats that we can be disconnected from SWIFT. We have finished working on our own payment system, and if something happens, all operations in SWIFT format will work inside the country. We have created an alternative. So basically they, have been working on this as an alternative for the last couple of years, being that tensions have been high because the U.S. continues to paint Russia as being the villain and the bad guys on this planet that needs to be dealt with. So more and more sanctions are coming, which they're not realizing they're playing into the hands of really encouraging them to get away from the dollar. So it makes you think, is this a deliberate action, or is this just something they're doing out of the fact that they're not aware that no one really needs the U.S. dollar except us here in the country here. So very next article here. from New China. It says Russia finishes working on alternative interbank systems. So this was as of earlier this year as well. But the fact is, quoting him as saying, Russia has prepared for any of monetary crisis, which means they are aware or, expecting something sooner than later. It says, such as a dollar collapse or sanctions that might be used to attack the Russian currency. So just to give an idea, the fact that the Russian bank is aware of the idea that there could be a dollar collapse or just continued sanctions against Russia, but they're prepared in their mind. And then the very last article here is from the Activist Post, and it goes to show how not only is Russia beginning to make preparations for, or have been making preparations for, the day the dollar or the Federal Reserve note is no longer needed or relied upon, China also has been working along with Russia to make sure they're ready as well for whatever event they may see coming. So give an idea what's going on here. It says, this is why the SWIFT system is so important to the global economy and why it is a significant hamper to the Iranian economy within 30 Iranian financial institutions. So Iran is one of those countries that's been sanctioned, so they're not allowed to participate in the SWIFT system. And said, this is exactly why China and Russia have been so keen on setting up an alternative infrastructure, as they call it, of their own, just in case a completely independent SWIFT organization acts as a proxy weapon for the U.S. State Department. It says now these latest announcements about Russian SWIFT alternative is not new news per se. The system was already up and operating in the trial basis several dozen banks in 2015. It says governor of the central bank latest pronouncement is more of a reassurance that the Russian economy will be able to continue in the event of anything, including the delisting from SWIFT, as related to reports from the 330 banks that are already attached to it. So, and there's more information here in regards to how China and Russia's system is working together. And just give an idea what else that means in China. It says likewise, the Chinese SWIFT alternative. So China has a alternative SWIFT system, and it's called CIPS or CIPS system. It says it was originally being touted as a rival to SWIFT. Then, as we've seen, it was watered down and became something less like a junk SWIFT. It says then in March 2016, CIPS actually signed a memorandum of understanding with SWIFT to use SWIFT's own platform for transmitting its messages. It says CIPS is now, if not an all-out subsidiary of SWIFT, at least just another one of the 150 or so payment networks that make up the use of SWIFT. So basically saying that CIPS joined in with SWIFT as far as becoming a part of it. And I would imagine that, and it's my opinion, that because we are indebted to China in so many ways we can't even begin to count. The whole idea of allowing China to be a part of it was something that's strategic on their part, so that if something does go wrong, not only are they included in SWIFT, but they also have their backup, which I'd imagine they also have something that's a little bit separate, so they can use as an alternative in case something happens. So more information there if you're interested. But it's basically want to give you an idea of what's going on in the news and how it all impacts the Federal Reserve note. So for those that are not aware, have not been following, the idea of diversifying and the concept of de-dollarization has been in the works for several years now. And it's all because of the fact that the Federal Reserve has not proven to be a good steward of their role as reserve currency issuer, and the United States government has done even worse because they've relied upon deficit spending and just overall debt to keep itself up and running. And so more and more credit and more Federal Reserve notes have been brought into circulation than the world actually needs. And so other banks recognize that we have abused our privilege as World Reserve overseer and have began shifting beyond the dollar. And so the only people who actually truly need Federal Reserve notes are U.S. citizens here in America, because it's our legal tender. But yet think about the time when all these alternative systems are up and running and they're no longer in need of dollars to do business amongst one another. And so when China and Russia begin, when they finalize everything that they're trying to do, which doesn't include the dollar, all those Federal Reserve notes and all those diligence and all treasuries, all those dollars, all that debt has to go somewhere, and it's going to come back to the United States of America, which a lot of people believe will be hyperinflationary, of which I believe, because if you watch and you keep an eye on the purchasing power of the dollar and that little graph that the Federal Reserve provides us, showing how over the years it's been dwindling down to where we're operating on 3 or 4% of the original purchasing power. And the biggest question is always, when it hits zero, it's going to go, well below the zero, and that's going to mean inflation has picked up, hyperinflation, confidence loss, and all of the sad things that will come along with a diminishing currency. So these are just things happening in the news. I believe it's very important to take heed of these events that's going on, because not only is the U.S. government playing along, we're kind of forcing Russia and China's hand, as well as just the overall BRIC nations, we're forcing their hands into beginning to think beyond our currency, just because we are in need of we're in need of a fight with somebody. So why not fight those that are already planning outside of us anyway? So just want to share my thoughts. Hope this is informative to you. Let me know your thoughts, and as well as any other thoughts you may have. Other than that, look forward to seeing you on the next news update. Thanks.